you hear good things.
It was just after dark when the station agent noticed the leak. A trunk, wooden, weathered, too heavy for one man to lift, was bleeding. A dark, syrupy trail ran down one side and onto the floor. He leaned in. The smell hit first. Sharp, sweet, rotten. Like meat left out too long in the desert heat. When they pried it open, the first thing they saw was hair, then skin, then what looked like a hand. The body was crammed in like butchered meat, the baggage clerk would later tell police. You didn't have to look long to know something was very wrong. Inside, they found two women. One whole, one dismembered, both murdered. The trunks had been checked in by a woman traveling alone. She wore a brown suit. Her right hand was bandaged. She smiled nervously. Her name was on the tag. But when the trunks were opened, she was already gone. Her fingerprints were on the handle. Her blood was on the sheets back in Phoenix. But her story, that was harder to hold. Winnie Ruth Judd would later say she shot her two roommates in self-defense, that they attacked her first, that she was trying to protect herself. They came at me like wildcats, she told detectives in a trembling voice. I didn't want to kill them. I only wanted them to stop. But when the investigators searched her home, the evidence told another story. Blood splatter behind the door. A .25 caliber pistol. A handsaw with human tissue still stuck in the teeth. And a letter she never mailed, addressed simply to Jack. Winnie had fled. The bodies were left behind in steamer trunks. And a nation followed her story with a kind of sick fascination. The press called her the Tiger Woman, the trunk murderess. But long before that, she was something else. A minister's daughter, a woman whose lungs were failing, whose heart was already half broken, a woman in love with a man who would never claim her in public, and a woman who'd later say she lost everything in one terrible night. Her name was Winnie Ruth Judd, and this is how she became a ghost in her own story. I'm Sidney Smith, and this is Murderous Podcast. This week's Murderous is Winnie Ruth Judd. In part 1, the woman in the brown suit. Before she was the woman in the brown suit, before the trunks, before the trial and the tabloids and the questions that never really got answered, Winnie Ruth McKinnell was a quiet girl from Indiana. The kind of girl people remembered fondly, if they remembered her at all. She was born in January of 1905, the daughter of a traveling Methodist minister. Her father was strict, her mother Carrie, was never well. Some accounts describe her as frail and depressive, a woman who spent long days in bed with drawn curtains, speaking softly and rarely. Others hint at mental instability, the kind that ran in families but wasn't talked about. Neighbors said the McKenna house was quiet in a way that made you nervous. So Carrie would sit on the porch with her hands clasped tight, staring into distance as if waiting for something to come undone. And this is the type of household that Winnie grew up in. So Winnie learned how to take up less space early in her life, how to smile when she didn't feel like it, how to be small and sweet and silent. And for most of her childhood, Winnie moved from town to town, a passenger in someone else's routine. She was small, often ill, and described as dreamy by the few teachers who wrote anything about her. One classmate will later say she was the kind of girl who looked like she'd float away if you let go of her hand. There was no record of abuse, no trauma written plainly, just a long, thin trail of loneliness. And by 17, she was married. The man was Dr. William Judd, 26 years older, so that'll put him at 43. A war veteran with an opium problem and a trail of failed postings behind him. They moved to Mexico, where he worked as a physician for the mines. She followed him into a dry, hot place she didn't belong. Within a year, she'd miscarried. Within 2, she was showing signs of tuberculosis. The sickness made her frailer, more dependent. And as her marriage unraveled, she started telling small lies. Said she worked at clinics she didn't. Said she had letters from people she never met. Told her friends back home she was happy and rich. One acquaintance would say later, Winnie never lied to hurt people. She lied to be interesting. She lied to belong. By 1930, the marriage was all but over. She moved to Phoenix, Arizona, alone. Still legally married, but living like she was on her own. Winnie found work as a medical secretary and x-ray technician at the Grinnell Clinic, a respected practice with modern equipment and a good reputation. She was one of the only women working there, and she was the often absent, sick again, always coughing, always pale. She wore gloves in the summer to hide the shaking in her fingers. And when she smiled, it never quite reached her eyes. Still, men liked her, especially Jack Halloran, a well-known businessman and ladies' man with deep roots in Phoenix politics. But Halloran was more than just a local businessman. He was a power broker, wealthy, married, charming, and deeply embedded in Phoenix politics. He hosted private parties for judges, sat on multiple civic boards, and was widely seen as untouchable. Jack owned a lumber company and served as Phoenix vice consul to Mexico, a rare diplomatic title that gave him both credibility and cover. When Jack wanted something buried, it stayed buried. But there was one thing that he couldn't hide, even if he wanted to, even if he attempted to. He liked women who didn't ask questions. And Winnie adored him. Winnie moved into a small cottage on Brill Street, owned by two other women, Agnes and LeRoi, known as Anne, and Hedvig Samuelson, called Sammy by friends. The three formed an uneasy triangle. Anne and Sammy were glamorous, older, self-sufficient, and perhaps more than just roommates. Some neighbors whispered that Anne could be cruel behind closed doors, that she drank too much, that she liked to watch people squirm. Winnie was younger, less worldly, and in love with Jack, with their attention, with the idea that she finally belonged. But beneath the surface, things were shifting. In the months leading up to the murders, Winnie's coworkers noticed changes. She was more withdrawn, sometimes tearful at her desk, often absent with vague excuses. One nurse said she found her crying in the storage room, clutching a letter and mumbling something about betrayal. At home, the tension was worse. The women argued loudly and made comments about Winnie stealing her man. Sammy reportedly told a friend, "That girl's not right. She's going to snap one of these days." Winnie's brother, Burton, later said she was under a lot of strain, lonely, sick, and desperate to be loved by someone who didn't love her back. By October 1931, all the quiet fractures were beginning to show. Her body was weak, her temper shorter, her connection to reality slipping. But no one stepped in. Not her family, not her boss, not Jack. No one really noticed until they found the trunks. The house on Brill Street wasn't Winnie's. It belonged to Agnes and to Sammy, two single women in their 30s, independent, opinionated, and sharper than they looked. Anne was tall, stylish, and fiercely particular. Sammy was quieter, but carried herself like someone who knew more than she ever said. They weren't just roommates. They were a unit, and had been for years. Some neighbors thought they were a couple. Others didn't ask. They owned their home, hosted parties, drank gin when it was still technically illegal, and knew how to hold a grudge. Phoenix wasn't a big town yet, and women like Anne and Sammy were well known in certain circles, especially ones that included married men with too much time and money. Winnie moved into a small front room, technically a boarder, but not quite a guest. She was younger, quieter, and less polished. Where Anne was biting, Winnie was soft-spoken. Where Sammy wore rouge and smirked at the room, Winnie wore gloves and looked down at her shoes. At first, it might have worked. They shopped together, shared cigarettes, sat up late laughing, or at least tolerating one another. But it didn't last. Because Anne had a temper. One boarder remembered Anne throwing a glass at the wall when someone lit a cigarette too close to her drapes. Another said she once kicked a man out of a party mid-song. He'd made a joke about women working, and she didn't wait for the punchline. She didn't scream. She cut sharp and fast and expected silence when she was done. Sammy could be cold and was harder to read. One guest remembered asking her about Winnie once. Just a polite passing question, and getting back a tight smile and 3 words: she won't last. And Winnie had needs neither of them were willing to meet. She wanted to be accepted, loved, taken seriously. She tried, brought flowers for the table, ironed her dresses twice before outings, offered to help with chores that weren't hers, and called it playing house. Sammy just smirked and said, "You're not built for this circle." And so when they weren't valuing her, her mood shifted. A coworker from the clinic would later say, she'd show up to work radiant one day, crying the next. You never knew which Winnie you were going to get. And the women in the house noticed it too, especially Anne. To compound the issues with all of this, including the mood swings, Anne didn't suffer dramatics. She had strong opinions and wasn't afraid to share them. And she made it clear Winnie was a guest, not a friend. There were fights, sharp words behind closed doors, slammed doors, muttered insults. Neighbors sometimes heard them through the thin plaster walls. Sammy, while more private, didn't hide her feelings either. She reportedly told one friend, "Winnie's not well. She talks to herself. She watches us like she's studying something." And still, Winnie stayed. Because as volatile as the house had become, it was the only place where she was close to the life she wanted. A life of parties, connections, men who mattered. But while studying this case, one question always stuck with me. Why did they let her stay? Why did 2 women who seemed to loathe her keep her close? In the research, I could find that some said it was pity. Others said Anne liked the power. A third woman in the house meant someone to split more of the mortgage with. They made her go run errands. And maybe even for women like them, they kept around just to be an audience for them. Winnie made them look like stars, one neighbor said. She didn't belong, and that made them shine brighter. But there's always another reason, usually hidden just beneath the surface. And at the center of it all was a man both Anne and Winnie were connected to, even if neither of them would admit it out loud. Jack Halloran wasn't handsome in the way movie stars were. But in Phoenix, 1931, he didn't have to be. He was charming, charismatic, and most importantly, connected, well connected. Jack came from money, old Arizona lumber money. His father had helped build the family business, and Jack inherited it already thriving. The Halloran Lumber Company, one of the largest in the state. But Jack wasn't just a businessman. He was a social operator. He sat on boards, chaired city commissions, donated to charities with the kind of checks that got buildings named after you. He'd helped fund judges' campaigns, helped city officials out of personal scandals. He was the guy you called when you needed something cleaned up, smoothed over, or quietly buried. As one reporter later put it, Halloran didn't run Phoenix, but nothing in Phoenix ran without him. Arizona Republic, 1932. That kind of man doesn't need to flex his power. He simply makes a call and things disappear. Businessmen, judges, lawmen, they didn't just know Jack, they owed him. He was part of the city's social engine. And when he walked into a room, women leaned in and men made room. Winnie met Jack at a political fundraiser in early 1931. She was 26, pale, dressed in a borrowed gown. He was 44, confident, comfortable, smelling like he already knew her name. Their connection was instant, but not equal. Jack had a reputation. He liked women. He flirted freely. And as some put it, he entertained multiple female friendships at once. A reporter later wrote, "It was an open secret. Jack liked variety. And his charm made it easy to forget just how often he used it." Phoenix Gazette, 1932. Winnie wasn't naive, but she was swept up. He took her to dinners, bought her gifts, slipped her money when her health flared up. He called her his little Winnie. And for a while, she believed he cared. But Jack Halloran didn't commit. Not to her. Not to anyone outside his carefully managed public life. And Winnie didn't take that well. Not at all. In private, she wrote him letters. Emotional, sometimes rambling. One, recovered after the murder, read, "You say I'm sweet, but not sweet enough to be seen beside you. I am so tired, Jack. I feel like I'm coming apart." Others in the Brill Street house, especially Anne, noticed the way Winnie lit up when Jack called and crumbled when he didn't. It wasn't just that Anne disliked Jack. It was that Jack's interest in Winnie put her at the center of something Anne had always controlled. That's when the rumors started. That Jack was sleeping with Anne. That he had once pursued Sammy. That Winnie was just the latest in a long string of women who believed they were special, only to learn that they weren't. One witness, an acquaintance of Anne's, claimed, Anne thought Jack was hers. Winnie was like a child playing dress up. It annoyed Anne. How desperate she was to be wanted. Interview quoted in the book The Trunk Murderess. Still, Jack kept calling, kept inviting Winnie to events, kept promising someday. And Winnie, no matter how much it hurt, kept saying yes. But power like Jack's has a price. He didn't just have friends. He had leverage. And later, when the blood was already drying in the Brill Street house, he would try to use that power to disappear from the story entirely. But for now, in October 1931, He was still just a man playing three women against each other, and none of them were winning. By the fall of 1931, the Brill Street house had gone quiet. Not peaceful, tense. Winnie was missing work more often. She looked pale, thinner than usual, circles under her eyes. She told co-workers her lungs were flaring up again. But some suspected something else. One nurse at the Granada clinic later said, she wasn't just sick. She was unraveling. She talked to herself in the break room, wrote things in her hands, then rubbed them off like she didn't want anyone to see. And back at the house, it wasn't much better. Anne and Sammy were keeping their distance, but also keeping tabs. There were whispers behind closed doors and passing glances. One neighbor remembered, the lights were on late some nights. You'd see shadows pacing past the front windows. Nobody saying anything, but everybody knew something was off in that house. Jack wasn't calling as much. When he did, it was brief, detached. Winnie still dressed up before seeing him, still curled her hair, still put on perfume. But when she came home, she looked worse. Anne took notice, not with sympathy, but with contempt. She was telling people Winnie was unstable, said she was acting crazy, said she couldn't be trusted. She's obsessed with Jack, Anne reportedly told a friend. And when he finally cuts her off, she's going to lose it. Some said Anne threatened to have Winnie evicted. Others said she liked watching her squirm. And Sammy, who rarely said much, was overheard one night in the kitchen saying, she's not right. I don't care if she's sick or sad. I don't want her in this house anymore. But Winnie didn't leave. She wrote in her journal short lines, looped handwriting, sentences that drifted and sometimes stopped mid-thought. One entry read, I cannot go on. I have tried to make them like me. I tried to keep myself good and pretty, but I am so tired. No one sees me. Another, folded into the pages of an old calendar, read, if I could only see you, I would not feel this way. You could stop all this sadness with one kind word. It was said that she sat for hours on the couch, staring at nothing. Sounds maybe a little bit like her mom to me at this point. Sometimes she'd cry. Sometimes Winnie would just sit and hum. Sometimes she just stood still, listening for footsteps upstairs. She told one coworker, I feel like I'm losing parts of myself, like I'm watching someone else walk around in my body. And then she stopped showing up to the clinic altogether. The last week before it all broke open, something changed. Winnie had been trying to get Jack on the phone for days. He wouldn't answer. She left notes. One of them read, I did everything for you. I left my home, my marriage, my dignity. If you don't want me, at least tell me that. Jack never responded. And at the same time, Anne and Sammy were planning a party. Nothing fancy, just some drinks, a few friends from the neighborhood. But they didn't invite Winnie. She heard them whispering about it through doors left slightly ajar, through laughter that paused when she walked in. One guest later said, Anne told us not to mention the party in front of Winnie. Said it was better if she didn't know. But she did know. And it stuck. Another neighbor recalled, I think Anne wanted her out. She thought excluding her would do the trick. That week, she was heard muttering in the hallway. Not yelling, just murmuring. Low, constant. Like she was arguing with someone who wasn't there. And when a neighbor saw her walking to the mailbox barefoot, hair unbrushed, eyes swollen, she asked if she was okay. Winnie smiled and said, I'm fine. Everything's going to be fine now. It's October 16th, 1931. Inside the little house on Brill Street, the lights are still on late into the night. Neighbors will later say they heard nothing. No shouting, no screaming, just a heavy silence. But inside, something had snapped. In the morning, 2 women would be missing, and Winnie would be standing in her living room, bruised, bandaged, and suddenly very quiet. You've been listening to a production of Sidney Smith Creative, LLC, and the You Hear Good Things podcast network, all rights reserved. For more true crime stories that stay with you, follow Murderous Podcast on your favorite platform and join the community on Patreon for early access, bonus content, and deeper cuts. What do you make of this one? Was it the ache of being left out? The power imbalance between Winnie and the women she lived with? Or was it the silence from the man who had all the influence and none of the consequences? We're only at the beginning, but something already feels broken. I want to know what stuck with you. Was Winnie being manipulated, ignored, or did she already know exactly what she was capable of? Leave a review on Apple or Castbox. Follow the show on Spotify or iHeart so you never miss a Thursday drop. And if this one left you quiet, send me a DM. The link's in the episode description. You are the quiet jury, and your verdict matters. On air sources, The Trunk Murderess, Winnie Ruth Judd by Jana Bombers Batch. Trial transcripts from the Arizona State Archives. Original coverage from the Arizona Republic and Phoenix Gazette, 1931 to 1933. Oral histories collected by the Arizona Historical Society. Police records and post-arrest statements from Phoenix PD archives. Private correspondence excerpts preserved in the Halloran family collection. Psychiatric evaluation notes and parole board filings, 1940s to the 1960s. Retrospective analysis published by Arizona Highways and True Crime Magazine. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious.